The Ghost in the Sky, Germany's Final Gamble Cold Open. It is November 1944. Over the industrial heartland of Germany, an American bomber pilot named Fred Christensen stares ahead through his bomb sight. Below, the factories of Munich blur into a tapestry of smoke and fire. His B-17 shudders with the recoil of its own guns. Around him, the sky is chaos, flak bursts, the screams of wounded engines, the acrid smell of burning aluminum. Then he sees it, a shape. Impossibly fast, impossibly sleek. It rises from the clouds with a grace that seems to defy the laws of war itself. No propeller, no thunderous piston engine, just a silver ghost, moving at speeds Christensen's mind cannot process. His guns swivel, he fires, but the thing is already gone, vanished, like it was never there at all. Fred Christensen will never forget what he saw that day. He will spend the rest of his life trying to convince people it was real. Because what he witnessed wasn't science fiction. It was Germany's last desperate hope. It was the Messerschmitt 262, and it was the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. Act 1. The World Before. To understand how a machine like the Me-262 came to exist, we must first understand the man who dreamed it into being. His name was Willy Messerschmitt. Born in 1905 in Frankfurt am Main, Messerschmitt was obsessed with flight from childhood. Not in the romantic sense of pilots and adventure, but in the cold, calculating sense of engineering. Numbers, efficiency, speed. By 1933, as Adolf Hitler consolidated his grip on Germany, Messerschmitt had already established himself as one of Europe's most brilliant aircraft designers. His Bf-109 fighter was a masterpiece of aeronautical engineering. Sleek, powerful, elegant, thousands would be built. Thousands would kill. But by 1939, even as the Bf-109 dominated European skies, Messerschmitt knew something the rest of the world did not. Piston engines had reached their limit. The fastest propeller-driven fighters of the era pushed toward 450 miles per hour. But the laws of physics were immovable. Air resistance, drag, the sheer mechanical limits of pistons and cylinders, these forces could not be overcome. The future of air combat, Messerschmitt understood, did not belong to propellers. It belonged to jet propulsion. In Britain, a young engineer named Frank Whittle had already begun experimenting with jet engines. In Germany, a brilliant young technician named Hans von Ohain was doing the same. By the late 1930s, both men had proof of concept. The jet age was coming, but the question was, who would weaponize it first? It is 1939. War has erupted across Europe. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, rules the skies with the Bf-109. Adolf Hitler, drunk on early victories in Poland and France, sees no reason to invest massive resources in exotic new technologies. The war, he believes, will be over within months, years, certainly not long enough to develop something as untested and unproven as a jet-powered aircraft. This is Germany's first fatal mistake. While Hitler dreams of quick conquest, the engineers dream of revolution. And Messerschmitt, sensing an opportunity in this bureaucratic indifference, begins secret work on what will become the Me-262. The project begins not with Messerschmitt at all, but with a man named Helmut Schelp, an aeronautical engineer working for the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, the German Air Ministry. In 1939, Schelp issues a radical specification. He wants a fighter aircraft powered by 2 turbojet engines. Not 1, 2. This redundancy will mean speed, reliability, and firepower that no piston engine fighter could match. Messerschmitt sees the potential immediately. His design bureau in Augsburg begins preliminary sketches. The aircraft will be revolutionary in every respect. The fuselage is sleek, almost organic in its curves. The wings sweep backward at an angle, a design innovation that will reduce aerodynamic drag at high speeds. The tail surfaces are thin and precise. Every gram of weight is scrutinized. Every millimeter is calculated. But there is a problem. The jet engines themselves do not yet exist. The Heinkel HES-011 turbojets, which Messerschmitt's design is built around, are still in development. They are unreliable. They overheat. The turbine blades, spinning at unimaginable speeds, fail without warning. The engines eat fuel with the appetite of a vast beast, and they do not produce nearly the thrust that early calculations suggested they should. Still, Messerschmitt pushes forward. By 1941, detailed construction plans are complete. The fuselage takes shape in Augsburg's assembly halls. Workers, many of them conscripted laborers from occupied territories, mill aluminum skin, rivet frameworks, test hydraulic systems. The first prototype is almost complete. It is April 1941. Across the world, Germany has launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. Hitler, confident and reckless, believes victory is certain. Tens of thousands of German soldiers are pouring across the eastern frontier. In the skies above, the Bf-109 still reigns supreme. And in the dark workshops of Augsburg, a secret takes shape. The first Me-262 prototype, designated V1, is still not complete. The jet engines designed for it have been delayed. Instead, a conventional Daimler-Benz piston engine is installed for initial flight tests. It is an ungainly compromise, like grafting the head of a racehorse onto the body of a thoroughbred, but it will have to do. The aircraft that emerges from these factories looks like nothing that has ever flown. Its fuselage is impossibly slender. Its nose tapers to a point. The wings sweep backward in a way that seems to violate every principle of conventional aircraft design. Pilots who see it for the first time stare in incomprehension. What manner of machine is this? The men who created it understand what they have built. They understand that this aircraft represents a quantum leap in aviation technology. They understand that if it works, if the engines can be made reliable, if the design can be proven sound, it will be the most formidable fighter in the world. But they do not understand the true nature of the man who rules their nation. They do not understand that Adolf Hitler, for all his ambition, has a mind that is fundamentally conservative when it comes to technology. He distrusts innovation. He fears that resources devoted to experimental new weapons are resources taken away from tried and tested designs. And he is surrounded by sycophants and yes-men who tell him exactly what he wants to hear. Act 2, The Storm. It is August 1942. Adolf Hitler, in a moment of rare inspiration, decides to visit the Messerschmitt factories at Augsburg. The visit is kept secret for security reasons, but word leaks out through the Luftwaffe command structure. Messerschmitt himself prepares a demonstration. The first Me-262 prototype will fly for the Führer. The aircraft is wheeled out onto the tarmac. It sits in the pale August sun like a bird of prey, its sleek fuselage gleaming with fresh paint. The pilot chosen for this historic flight is Fritz Wendel, one of Germany's most accomplished test pilots. He is nervous. The aircraft has never actually flown with its intended jet engines. The current engines are still temperamental, still prone to failure, but orders are orders. Wendel climbs into the narrow cockpit. The instruments are unfamiliar, modern, precise, nothing like the older fighters he knows. He runs through the checklist. The engines spool up, whining with a sound that no piston engine has ever made. A keening, whistling sound, eerie, otherworldly. The runway stretches ahead. Wendel releases the brakes. The aircraft accelerates, slowly at first, then faster. The ground blurs beneath the wheels, faster, faster. The tail comes up, and suddenly, impossibly, the aircraft is airborne. For a few moments, Fritz Wendel is flying the future. The aircraft responds to the controls with a grace and sensitivity that astounds him. The speed builds. The world below becomes abstract. Hills, forests, roads, they blur into insignificance. The Me-262 climbs and climbs and climbs. But Hitler is not impressed. He looks at the aircraft in the sky, a small speck moving at incomprehensible velocity, and feels nothing but doubt. The aircraft looks strange. It does not have the aggressive lines of the Bf-109. It does not look like a fighter. It looks like an experiment. When Wendel lands and descends from the cockpit, flushed with the extraordinary experience of piloting the world's first jet fighter, he is taken to meet the Führer. Hitler asks him a single question: can it carry bombs? This question, asked in a moment of apparent disinterest, will change everything. Messerschmitt says yes. Of course, the aircraft could be modified. A few bombs could be strapped to its sleek fuselage. It could become a fighter bomber, a Jaeger bomber. Hitler's eyes light up. This is what excites him. Not a pure fighter, but a multi-purpose aircraft. A fighter bomber that could strike targets and return to base. From this moment forward, the Me-262 is no longer the sole property of the Luftwaffe's fighter command. It is claimed by multiple factions, each with its own vision of what the aircraft should do. The fighter pilots want it as a pure interceptor, Fast, agile, optimized for destroying enemy bombers. The bomber commanders wanted equipped with ordnance, capable of delivering strikes against Allied targets. Hitler, in his characteristic way, wants it to be both things at once. The result is compromise, the worst possible outcome for a revolutionary aircraft. Resources are divided, development is delayed. Meetings multiply. Bureaucrats and generals debate while the aircraft sits in hangars, undergoing endless modifications that accomplish nothing but waste precious time. And all the while, Germany is losing the war. It is 1943 now, and the situation has transformed completely. The invasion of the Soviet Union, which Hitler was so certain would be a swift victory, has become a nightmare of attrition. The Wehrmacht bleeds men and material on the endless steppes. The British and Americans, growing in strength, are bombing German cities with increasing fury. The Luftwaffe, once invincible, is struggling to maintain air superiority against opponents who have inexhaustible supplies of aircraft and pilots. In this climate of crisis, some voices in the Luftwaffe begin to ask, where is the Me-262? Where is this wonder weapon that will turn the tide? The answer is complicated. The aircraft exists, 3, 4, then 5 prototypes have been built. They have flown, they have demonstrated extraordinary performance. Some have achieved speeds above 600 miles per hour, faster than anything else in the sky. But the jet engines remain problematic. They are unreliable, they are hungry for fuel, and the aircraft itself has revealed unexpected handling characteristics at high speeds. The wings, swept back in that revolutionary angle, create instabilities that pilots find alarming. Still, progress is being made. Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most famous fighter pilots, flies the Me-262 in early 1943. He is astounded. He immediately recognizes what this aircraft could do. In his reports to Luftwaffe High Command, Galland is enthusiastic, even rapturous. This aircraft, he says, could change everything. It could restore German air superiority. It could turn the war. Hitler receives these reports. But by now, his mind has moved on to other fantasies. Wonder weapons, miracle technologies, a vast flying wing bomber that would rain destruction on American cities, a super heavy tank with armor inches thick, a rocket that would strike London with atomic force. Hitler's imagination has become untethered from reality. He sees the Me-262 not as it is, but as what it could be, a fighter bomber that would devastate Allied invasion forces. And so, when production orders finally come through in late 1943, they come with a fatal requirement. The Me-262 must be equipped to carry bombs. It must be a fighter bomber, first and foremost. The pure fighter version, the version that Galland and the other pilots desperately want, is relegated to secondary importance. It is the second fatal mistake. The first was to ignore the aircraft entirely. The second is to saddle it with requirements it was never designed to meet. By early 1944, the first production Me-262s are beginning to leave the assembly lines. The aircraft that emerges is still revolutionary, still far ahead of anything the Allies have in the sky. But it is encumbered, slowed by external bomb racks, compromised by modifications that were never part of the original design. The aircraft that could have been the perfect air superiority fighter has become a jack of all trades, master of none. The pilots who fly it understand immediately what has been lost. They understand that they are flying a crippled masterpiece. Many of them are veterans of countless air battles. They have seen friends die in inferior aircraft. They know instinctively what the Me-262 could do without its bomber shackles. And they know that their superiors have made a terrible decision. Among these pilots is a man named Kurt Welter. He is a former bomber pilot, transferred to fighters in the desperate days when the Luftwaffe can no longer afford to specialize. Welter will become the first pilot to shoot down an Allied jet fighter, an American Lockheed P-80 shooting star that has infiltrated German airspace. He will become one of the Me-262's most talented practitioners. But even Welter cannot overcome the inherent contradictions built into the aircraft's role. How can a fighter defend against enemy bombers when it is burdened with its own ordnance? How can it maneuver aggressively when every pound of bomb weight degrades its performance? The aircraft, designed to be a scalpel, has been turned into a club, and now the Allies have discovered the secret. It is spring of 1944. A Me-262 crashes in a reconnaissance flight over Italy. The aircraft is only partially destroyed. The Allies recover pieces of it, pieces that are extraordinary, that hint at technologies beyond their current capabilities. The sweeping wings, the jet engine, the smooth fuselage. Within weeks, the design is in American hands. American intelligence services begin to comprehend what Germany has achieved. A jet fighter, a production jet fighter, already flying, already operational. This is terrifying, because while America and Britain have their own jet fighter programs underway, neither program is close to producing aircraft that can match the Me-262's performance. The Me-262, which was supposed to be Germany's secret weapon, has become instead a kind of nightmare that haunts Allied command. What if the Germans had built thousands of them? What if they had deployed them in the right way? What if they had ignored Hitler's bomber fantasies and built pure fighters? These are the questions that keep Allied planners awake at night. The answer, fortunately for the Allies, is that Germany has not built thousands. Production is slow, painfully slow. The factories that should be producing the Me-262 are being bombed relentlessly by American strategic air forces. The workers are exhausted, demoralized. Supply chains for critical components are fractured, and the jet engines themselves remain problems. They overheat after an hour of flight. They develop stress cracks. Pilots are killed when engines fail at altitude. By the time the Me-262 is truly ready for large-scale deployment, it is late 1944. The Germans are losing on every front. The Soviet army is driving westward relentlessly, liberating occupied territories, advancing toward Germany itself. In the west, the Allies have landed at Normandy and are breaking out into the French countryside. The Luftwaffe itself is in desperate straits. Thousands of pilots have been killed. Training has become almost non-existent. Fuel is so scarce that whole squadrons are grounded. It is in this context of collapse that the first Me-262 fighter units are finally activated. In October 1944, a unit called Erprobungskommando 262, the 262 Experimental Command, officially begins combat operations. The first German unit equipped with jet fighters is finally taking to the air in anger. Their opponents are bomber formations of the United States Army Air Forces. The bombers are consolidated B-17 flying fortresses and North American B-29 superfortresses, massive aircraft, flying in tight formations, defended by dozens of 50 caliber machine guns. A single bomber can weigh 35,000 pounds. A formation of 30 bombers represents nearly 500,000 pounds of aluminum, explosives, and human determination. The pilots of the Me-262 look at these formations and understand, finally and completely, what the Germans have built. An aircraft that can make an attack run on a bomber formation and still escape. An aircraft that can fly circles around the American escort fighters. An aircraft that can climb above a formation and attack from altitude, then dive away at speeds that no propeller-driven fighter can match. On November 8, 1944, a pilot named Kurt Welter, flying a Me-262, achieves the first jet-on-jet air victory, downing an American P-80 shooting star that has ventured too far into German airspace. But this victory, remarkable as it is also a warning. It tells the Allies that the aircraft they have feared is now truly operational. Throughout the fall of 1944 and into the winter, small groups of Me-262s begin to appear in the skies over Germany. They do not appear in large numbers. Production has never exceeded a handful of aircraft per month. By December, perhaps 100 exist, scattered across various bases. But those 100 aircraft, in the right hands, prove devastatingly effective. An American bomber pilot named Robert Schulian will later describe the experience of seeing a Me-262 diving on his formation. The enemy fighters, he says, would simply disappear. They would climb above the formation, their jets leaving contrails in the cold upper atmosphere. Then they would roll over and dive, accelerating to speeds that made the B-17s look like they were standing still. The guns would come on, 4 30mm cannons in the nose, devastating weapons. Then the German would pull up and away, climbing vertically, disappearing again. By the time the American gunners could even track the Me-262, it was already gone. The aircraft had struck, wounded perhaps, but escaped, and there was nothing the escort fighters could do. The P-51 Mustangs, for all their excellence, could not match the jet's speed. They could not follow it in a climb. They were faced with an opponent that operated under different rules in a different dimension of speed. Act 3. The Reckoning. The year 1945 opens with Germany standing at the precipice of annihilation. The Soviet army is hammering at the gates of East Prussia. The Americans and British are preparing for the final invasion of Germany itself. The cities are ruins. The economy is collapsed. The people are starving. And yet, in the corridors of the Air Ministry and in the fighter squadrons still flying, there is a desperate hope. The Me-262. If we can just build enough of them. If we can just get them operational in large enough numbers. Perhaps, just perhaps, we can slow the inevitable. This hope is a fantasy. But it is a fantasy that Germany clings to with the grip of a drowning man clutching at driftwood. By February 1945, 3 whole fighter units equipped with Me-262s are flying regular combat missions. The aircraft are demonstrating remarkable effectiveness. In a single day in early February, Me-262 pilots claim to have shot down 17 Allied aircraft. American bomber formations are being intercepted with increasing regularity. The Me-262 pilots, many of them veterans of years of air combat, are proving to be formidable adversaries. Adolf Galland, transferred from regular fighter units to command the Me-262 operations, makes a decision in March 1945 that will be controversial for the rest of his life. He advocates for a major change in tactics. Rather than using the Me-262s to defend against bombers, he argues, they should be held in reserve for a massive all-out surprise attack. A great aerial ambush that would catch the Allies by surprise and inflict catastrophic losses. The operation is planned for March 24, 1945. Called Unternehmen Bodenplatte, Operation Baseplate, it is designed to be a simultaneous attack on multiple Allied airfields in Belgium, France, and Holland. The Me-262s, joined by hundreds of conventional fighters, would strike at dawn, destroying thousands of enemy aircraft on the ground. The operation launches on schedule. Me-262s and Bf-109s stream across the border into Allied-held territory. For a few hours, it is a triumph. Allied airfields erupt in flames. Hundreds of American and British aircraft are destroyed or damaged. The Germans achieve complete tactical surprise, but it is a Pyrrhic victory. The Me-262s, returning to German bases to refuel and rearm, find those bases under attack. Allied fighters, having regrouped, are hitting German airfields with devastating accuracy. Dozens of Me-262s are destroyed on the ground. German pilots are killed. The aircraft are damaged beyond repair. And for what? The losses inflicted on the Allies are significant but not decisive. By May, the Allies will have replaced every aircraft lost in Operation Baseplate. For Germany, every aircraft lost is one less hope. By April 1945, the situation has become hopeless even to the most hardened optimists. Soviet forces are entering Germany from the east. American and British forces are racing across Germany from the west. The Luftwaffe no longer controls any part of German airspace. Pilots are dying by the dozen every day, shot down by overwhelming enemy numbers. The Me-262, the aircraft that was supposed to restore German air superiority, has become instead a symbol of Germany's desperation and technological prowess too late to matter. The aircraft is magnificently engineered. The pilots flying it are among the bravest and most skilled in history. But they are also like men bailing out a sinking ship with teaspoons. The tide is too vast to overcome. In the very last days of the war, as Soviet tanks roll through Berlin and American forces push toward the borders of the Reich, some Me-262s are still flying. Pilots, many of them barely trained, are still taking off in the aircraft, still engaging the enemy, still dying. One of the last recorded Me-262 victories occurs on April 26, 1945, when a German pilot manages to shoot down an American Mustang. By this point, such victories mean nothing. Germany is surrendering. The Wehrmacht is disintegrating. The Nazi regime is days away from total collapse. On May 7, 1945, Germany officially surrenders. World War II in Europe is over. The war that the Me-262 was supposed to change, the war that this revolutionary aircraft was supposed to turn in Germany's favor, has ended. Germany has been defeated utterly and completely. The Allies will occupy the country. The cities will be partitioned. The Reich, which Hitler boasted would last 1,000 years, will cease to exist. And what of the Me-262 itself? Dozens of intact aircraft are captured by American and Soviet forces as they advance into Germany. Engineers and scientists swarm over them, studying every detail, taking measurements, making sketches. The aircraft that had been shrouded in such secrecy is now available for examination by the entire world. The engines are studied, the wing design is analyzed, the construction techniques are documented, and within months, both America and the Soviet Union have begun their own jet fighter programs in earnest, borrowing heavily from what they have learned from the Me-262. The American Lockheed F-80 Shooting Star, already in development, is rushed into production. The Soviet MiG-15, which will play a starring role in the Korean War just 5 years later, owes much to the technical lessons learned from examining Me-262s. The jet age that the aircraft inaugurated will be shaped by the knowledge that Germany had acquired at such terrible cost. But here is the ultimate tragedy. Germany itself will not benefit from this revolution. The nation that created the world's first operational jet fighter will be divided into occupation zones. Its industrial capacity will be dismantled. Its engineers and scientists will be scattered across the globe, many of them captured by either the Americans or the Soviets, and forced to work on their respective aircraft programs. Willy Messerschmitt, the man who designed the aircraft, will spend time in captivity, interrogated by Allied intelligence. He will eventually be released and will live until 1956. But his great works, the aircraft that defined an era of aviation, are now property of the victors. The Me-262 aircraft themselves face varied fates. Some are tested by Allied air forces to understand their capabilities. Some are deliberately destroyed so that they cannot be studied by the enemy. Many are simply abandoned, left to rust in hangars as the occupation forces sort through the detritus of Germany's defeat. A few survive to this day, preserved in museums and private collections. They sit in climate-controlled buildings, gleaming in spotlights, mute testaments to a moment of technological brilliance in the midst of human catastrophe. Epilogue. The question historians have debated for 80 years is simple but profound. What if Germany had not ignored the Me-262 in the early years of the war? What if Hitler had not insisted on turning it into a fighter bomber? What if the aircraft had been available in large numbers a year earlier? The answer, we now know from decades of military analysis, is that it would have changed very little. The Me-262 was magnificent, yes. It was revolutionary, certainly, but it was too late. Germany in 1944 was losing on every front. The Luftwaffe was hemorrhaging pilots faster than it could replace them. Fuel was becoming critically scarce. The economy was collapsing. No single weapon system, no matter how advanced, could have reversed these fundamental strategic realities. And yet, the Me-262 remains one of the most fascinating artifacts of World War II, precisely because it represents the road not taken. It is a monument to human ingenuity in service of a doomed cause. It is proof that even in the twilight of their power, German engineers and designers could still create something breathtaking, something that would influence aviation for decades to come. The aircraft that Fritz Wendel flew over Augsburg in 1942, the aircraft that Adolf Galland flew into combat in 1944, that aircraft represented more than just an engineering achievement. It represented the technological flowering of a nation that, for all its moral bankruptcy and political evil, had created some of the finest engineers and designers in human history. The tragedy of the Me-262 is that it emerged too late, deployed too reluctantly, and produced in quantities too small to matter. Had Germany won the war, had the Reich actually achieved its grotesque ambitions of continental domination, the Me-262 would be remembered as a turning point, a moment when one nation gained a decisive technological advantage. Instead, it is remembered as a ghost, a phantom that haunted the skies for a few months, astonishing the pilots who encountered it, terrifying military planners who could imagine what it might have been in different circumstances. When the Cold War began, just years after World War II ended, Both Americans and Soviets were obsessed with jet propulsion. Both understood that the future of air combat belonged to the jet engine, and both knew that Germany had shown the way. The Me-262 was a dead end technologically, replaced within years by more advanced designs. But it was also a beginning. It was the moment when aviation crossed a threshold from which it could never return. Today, more than 70 years after the last Me-262 flew in combat, fighter jets are ubiquitous. Nations across the globe deploy jets at the speed of sound and beyond. The era that the Me-262 inaugurated continues. It has become so normal, so routine, that we forget how revolutionary it was. But if you stand in front of a surviving Me-262, if you look at its elegant lines, if you run your hand across the smooth aluminum skin, you can still feel something of that revolution. You can sense the imagination of the men who designed it, the courage of the pilots who flew it, and the terrible trajectory of history that brought such an aircraft into being at precisely the wrong moment. The Me-262 never changed the course of World War II. It never delivered Germany from defeat, but it did something perhaps more enduring. It changed the future. It showed the world what was possible when human ingenuity was applied without limit, when engineers were freed from the constraints of convention, when a nation's best minds focused on a single objective with absolute commitment. That this was done in service of a regime of unspeakable evil is the great moral tragedy of the story. The Me-262 is a masterpiece created by a doomed civilization. It is beautiful and terrible at once. It is a ghost in the sky, forever reminding us that brilliance and evil, technological progress and human devastation can exist in the same moment, in the same aircraft, piloted by men caught between ambition and desperation. The war ended. The aircraft disappeared. The pilots died or survived and faded into age. But the Me-262 remains in museums and history in the memory of those who saw it fly. It remains as a question, not about what might have been, but about what we might become if we are not careful to remember that technology serves the moral purposes of those who wield it. The Me-262 was brilliant. It was also born from and served a catastrophe. That contradiction is its eternal legacy.